Picture this, you are running. The night is a maelstrom of ash and smoke, a suffocating blanket woven from your own past. Behind you, the city of redemption glows like a malevolent ember, a testament to the life you just burned to the ground to escape. Your lungs are twin fires, your legs are screaming, but you cannot stop. You clutch a heavy wool blanket around your head and shoulders, a makeshift shield not against the cold, but against the world's eyes. You run until the manicured streets give way to cracked earth, until the gas lamps are replaced by the indifferent stare of the moon. You run until your body finally betrays you, collapsing at the foot of a lonely ridge, the world dissolving into a merciful black. This is where he found her. Silas, a man whose own past was etched into the rugged landscape of his face. A scar, white and stark, ran from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, a permanent, grim smile carved by a life he'd long since abandoned. He was once Silas the Cyclone Kane, a name that echoed in rodeo arenas and dime novels, a legend of dust and glory. Now, he was just a man who preferred the company of his horses and the silence of the mountains. He had been checking his fence line when his mare, Dust Devil, shied, her ears twitching towards a heap of gray wool near a cluster of sagebrush. He dismounted, his movements deliberate, his eyes missing nothing. It was a woman, barely conscious, her breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. Her hands, raw and blistered, held the blanket to her face with a desperate strength, even in unconsciousness. He carried her back to his cabin, a small, sturdy structure built of ponderosa pine that smelled of wood smoke and leather. He laid her gently on the simple cot in the corner, her slight frame barely making an impression on the worn mattress. He built up the fire in the hearth, its warm light dancing across the rough-hewn walls. On one wall hung a single, faded poster from another lifetime, depicting a younger Silas, unscarred and grinning, tipping his hat from the back of a bucking bronco. He looked at the poster, then back at the woman on the cot. Two ghosts in one room. He fetched a basin of warm water and a clean cloth, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He reached to move the blanket from her face, to clean the soot and grime from her skin, but as his fingers brushed the wool, her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of a stormy sea, wide with a terror so profound it struck him silent. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of shattered glass. Don't touch me." Her knuckles were white where she gripped the blanket. "I'm too ugly. You can't look." Silas froze. He had seen fear in the eyes of men and beasts. He had faced down charging bulls and desperate outlaws. But the raw, agonizing shame in her voice was a weapon he had no defense against. He looked at her trembling form, the absolute conviction in her words. He saw not a monster, but a soul in such deep pain that it believed itself unworthy of a simple human kindness, of a single gaze. The famed cowboy, the man who had faced down arenas of roaring crowds, lifted his hand from the blanket, and he was silenced, not by disgust, not by shock, but by a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy that felt like a punch to the gut. He understood what it was to hide a part of yourself, to believe the scars on the outside define the person within. He simply nodded, his throat too tight for words. He left the basin on the small table beside her, along with a cup of fresh water, and retreated to the other side of the room, giving her the one thing she so clearly craved: distance. He sat in his old armchair, watching the fire, and listened to the sound of her quiet, broken breaths as they slowly evened out in sleep. Days bled into weeks. A silent pact formed between them in the quiet solitude of the cabin. She never removed the blanket from her head in his presence, a hooded, mysterious figure living in the corner of his home. He never asked her to. He would leave food on the table, a bowl of stew, fresh bread, a piece of fruit, and then go outside to tend to his horses or chop wood, giving her the privacy to eat. He spoke to her not with questions, but with stories. He spoke of the land, of the way the sun painted the canyons at dawn, of the stubborn resilience of the wildflowers that grew in the rocky soil. He spoke of his horses, Dust Devil and Ghost, describing their personalities as if they were old friends. He never asked her name. He never asked where she came from. He simply filled the silence with the calm, steady rhythm of his voice, weaving a sanctuary of words around her. Her name was Alara, and in the safety of that cabin, she began to heal. She listened to his voice, a low, rumbling baritone that was as solid and dependable as the mountains themselves. She started to leave the empty bowls outside the cabin door, a small, unspoken thank you. One afternoon, while Silas was brushing down Ghost in the corral, he heard a sound drifting from the cabin. It was faint, a fragile, hesitant melody. He stopped, his hand still on the horse's flank. She was humming. The tune was melancholic but beautiful, a ghost of a song that seemed to carry an immense weight of sorrow. It was the first sound she had made other than that first desperate whisper. He didn't mention it. The next day, he brought in an old, dust-covered guitar from the barn. He'd won it in a card game years ago and never learned to play. He polished the dark wood until it shone, checked the strings, and left it leaning against the wall near her cot, without a word. For 3 days, the guitar sat untouched. Silas began to think he'd made a mistake, that he'd pushed too hard. Then, one evening, as the shadows grew long and the air turned cool, the first tentative notes floated from the cabin. They were clumsy at first, then grew more confident. A melody bloomed in the stillness, a song of heartbreak and survival that was so pure, so achingly beautiful, it made his chest ache. He sat on the porch steps, the setting sun warming his back, and listened. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he saw her not as a shrouded figure of fear, but as the music she was creating. Her soul was not ugly. It was a symphony. He began to share more of himself. He told her about the rodeo, the roar of the crowd, the dizzying highs of fame. Then he told her how it ended. It was a bull named Crimson King, he said one night, his voice low as he stared into the fire. Meanest animal I ever saw. Threw me good. Horn caught me on the way down. He unconsciously touched the scar on his face. But that wasn't the worst of it. A boy, a young admirer, ran out into the arena. To help me, I suppose. Crimson King went for him. I got back up, tried to draw the bull away. But I was too slow. The fire crackled. The only sound in the room for a long moment. The boy was crippled. The crowd that once cheered my name, they looked at me with pity, or worse, blame. I couldn't stand their eyes. So I left, came up here. The cyclone was gone. Only Silas remained. He heard a soft rustle from the corner. Scars, Alara whispered, her voice still hoarse but clearer now. They make people stare. They do, Silas agreed, his gaze fixed on the flames. They think it's all you are. A mark of damage. They don't see the person who survived it. A profound understanding passed between them in that moment, an invisible thread connecting his visible scar to her hidden one. The next morning, when Silas came in from the stables, Alara was sitting on the edge of the cot. She still wore the blanket over her head, but she was holding the guitar, her fingers resting on the strings. She looked up in his direction. My name, she said, her voice soft but steady, is Alara. Silas stopped, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in years. It was a beginning, a fragile seed of trust planted in the barren ground of their shared pain. But they were living on borrowed time. The world they had both run from had a long memory, and the ember of redemption was not an ember at all. It was a wildfire, and it was sweeping towards them, ready to burn their nascent sanctuary to the ground. The peace was a fragile illusion, a calm before the inevitable violent storm. The storm arrived on a Tuesday, carried on the backs of 3 expensive horses and the shoulders of men who wore arrogance like a uniform. Silas was splitting firewood when he saw the riders cresting the ridge. He knew instantly they weren't lost travelers. Their leader was a man whose fine suit was an insult to the rugged landscape, his face soft and cruel. Silas recognized him from the wanted posters that sometimes made their way to the general store in town.
Mayor Alistair Thornton.
A man who bought and sold politicians and laws with equal ease, a smiling tyrant who ruled the city of redemption with an iron fist in a velvet glove. Silas set down his axe, his body going still, every sense on high alert. This was the world he had left behind, come to call on him. Inside, Alara heard the approaching hoofbeats. A cold dread, chillingly familiar, seized her. She had heard that sound in her nightmares every night since she'd fled. She scrambled back into the corner of the cot, pulling the blanket tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew, with a certainty that stole her breath, that he had found her. Thornton dismounted, his polished boots sinking into the dirt with a disdainful puff. He surveyed the humble cabin, his lip curling. "Silas the Cyclone Kane," he said, his voice smooth and laced with poison. "I heard a legend was hiding out in these hills. I see the stories were true, though you look rather weathered." He gestured to Silas's scar. Silas remained motionless, his expression unreadable stone. "This is private property. State your business and leave." Thornton chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "My business is inside your shack. I'm here for my property. A runaway songbird. Her name is Alara, and she belongs to me." He held up a piece of paper, a legally binding contract of servitude, signed with a shaky, coerced signature that Alara had been forced to make years ago. "She is my ward, my investment. And she has something of mine. She's a human being. Not property," Silas said, his voice a low growl. The air crackled with tension. His hand rested on the handle of his axe, not as a threat, but as a statement. He was not moving. "Ah, the noble cowboy," Thornton sneered. "Let me tell you about your precious human being. She was a gutter singer with a voice of an angel. I found her. I cleaned her up, dressed her in silks, gave her a stage. I made her, and in return all I asked for was her loyalty. Her obedience." His eyes darkened, the polished veneer cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. "But she grew defiant. She thought her voice gave her wings. She tried to fly away. So I had to clip them. Remind her who she belonged to." He gestured vaguely towards the cabin. "That face of hers? A lesson in gratitude. I owned her beauty, and when I could no longer have it, I made sure no one else would either." The fire was a regrettable, but necessary correction. Every word was a hammer blow, striking the last vestiges of peace from the air. Inside, Alara heard it all. She squeezed her eyes shut, Thornton's cruel words stripping away the fragile safety she had built. He was right. He had made her, and then he had unmade her. The shame, the horror, it all came flooding back. She was his creation, his ruined masterpiece. But then she heard Silas's voice, cutting through her despair. "You're a monster." It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the cold fury of a blizzard. "I am a businessman," Thornton corrected him, "and I've come to collect my asset. Give her to me, Kane, and I'll forget I found a washed-up rodeo clown squatting on this land. Resist, and my men will burn this hovel to the ground with both of you inside." The two men with him shifted, their hands moving to the pistols at their hips. The threat was plain. The choice was simple. Surrender or die. Silas looked from Thornton's smug face to the cabin door. He could hear Alara's ragged breathing from within. He thought of the hesitant music, of the quiet strength in her voice when she'd finally told him her name. He thought of his own scars, of the boy in the arena, of a life spent running from the eyes of others. He had run once. He would not run again. The cyclone wasn't dead. He had just been sleeping. He picked up his axe, the weight of it familiar and reassuring in his hands. "You'll leave now," Silas said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Or you'll be carried out." The confrontation exploded. Thornton gave a sharp nod, and his men drew their guns. But Silas was no longer a simple homesteader. He was motion, instinct, and fury. He moved with a speed that belied his size, the axe a blur. He didn't aim to kill, but to disarm, to intimidate. He slammed the flat of the axe head against the first gunman's wrist, the crack of bone echoing in the mountain air. The second man fired, the bullet splintering the wood of the porch pillar inches from Silas's head. Silas lunged, using the axe handle to sweep the man's legs out from under him. He went down hard, his head striking the ground with a sickening thud. The world had forgotten the cyclone was more than just a rider. He was a force of nature. Inside the cabin, the gunshot was a deafening crack that shattered Alara's paralysis. She heard the grunts, the thud of bodies, the venom in Thornton's voice as he shouted at his failing men. He was going to kill Silas, the kind, quiet man who had asked nothing of her, who had given her a sanctuary and treated her with a gentle dignity she'd thought she would never know again. The man who saw her not as a monster, but as a person. And she was cowering in the corner, hiding under a blanket, just as she had hidden her entire life. Her shame, her fear. It was the cage Thornton had built for her. The scars were his brand, his mark of ownership. To hide them was to let him win. A fire ignited within her, hotter and more powerful than the one that had scarred her flesh. It was a fire of pure, righteous rage. She stood up, her legs trembling but firm. With a deliberate, steadying breath, she reached up and pulled the blanket from her head. She let it fall to the floor. For the first time in over a year, she stood unveiled, letting the light touch her face. She walked to the door, her heart a war drum in her chest, and she opened it. The sight outside was chaos. Silas stood over the two downed men, the axe held ready, his chest heaving. Thornton, his face a mask of apoplectic fury, was backing away, drawing a small, ornate derringer from his coat pocket. "You obsolete relic," he snarled at Silas. "I will end you myself." His eyes flickered to the cabin door as it opened. He stopped, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across his face as he saw Alara. "Ah, my little songbird decides to join us. Come to your master. See what happens to those who defy me." Alara stepped out onto the porch, into the harsh afternoon light. One side of her face was as he remembered it, perfect and pale. The other was a tapestry of scars, the skin pulled tight and twisted, a permanent reminder of the flames. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only fire. "You don't own me, Alistair," she said, her voice ringing out, clear and strong, no longer a whisper. "You don't own my voice. You don't own my face. You don't own my soul." Her defiance, so public and so absolute, stunned him. It was the one thing he had not anticipated. Her courage was a beacon. It gave Silas the opening he needed. He lunged, not at Thornton, but at the ground beside him, swinging the axe down to bury its head deep in the earth, a gesture of finality. The raw power of the act made Thornton stumble back in fright. At that exact moment, another sound joined the fray, the thunder of more hoofbeats. Over the ridge came a dozen riders from the nearby town. The general store owner, the blacksmith, the town doctor. They'd seen Thornton's men ride through and, knowing the mayor's reputation and respecting the quiet man in the mountains, they had followed. They formed a silent, formidable line, their faces hard, their rifles held loosely but ready. They were a new family, a found family, forged in this moment of crisis to protect their own. Thornton looked from the resolute townspeople to the defiant woman to the unbreakable man, and he saw his power evaporate into the thin mountain air. Defeated, he scrambled onto his horse and fled, his threats dissolving into the dust. As the riders disappeared, a profound silence descended. Alara stood on the porch, the sunlight on her face. She felt Silas's presence beside her. He didn't look at her scars with pity, but with a deep, unwavering respect. He saw not a disfigurement, but a survivor's map, a testament to her strength. He reached out not to touch her face, but to gently take her hand. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers, a silent promise of safety, of partnership. Together, they watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a new day dawning on their shared future. So, let me ask you, what is true beauty? Is it a perfect face, untouched by hardship and pain? Or is it found in the spirit that refuses to be broken, the soul that learns to sing again even after the world has tried to silence it? We all carry scars. Some are on our skin, visible for all to see. Others we carry deep inside, hidden away under blankets of fear and shame. But what if those scars are not marks of ugliness, but symbols of our resilience? What if they are proof that we have lived, we have fought, and we have survived? Perhaps true strength isn't about never falling, but about having the courage to stand up, unveil your true self, and declare that you are not, and never will be, anyone's property. If this story of courage and redemption touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. What does survival mean to you? Like this video if you believe in the power of found family, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the unyielding strength of the human spirit.